All right, so we're live. Welcome everyone to the Online Accidental Counsellor Conference. And I would love to know, just before we start and I introduce Steve Wells, if you could just type into the chat box and just let us know where you're from, around Australia, New Zealand, or other parts of the world. And just type, yeah, if you can just type into that chat box, that'd be really great. And we'd love to know that we've got people online. I can see people showing up now. Hi, Monique. How are you? Good. Good afternoon, Monica. And Katrina's there. Hi, Prue. I'm here and ready. Good afternoon, all. Clementina, good to see you back. Hi, Mark. We've got some regular offenders here. Steve, Donna, Jody. Nice to see some folks who have been to some of the other sessions. Erin, Kerry, Danielle, Stacey, Stacey from Wingham, and Heather. Anne, great to see you again, Anne. Yes, we've had a great day. Thank you. Well, I've had a good day. Thank you, Anne. And Kathy from Southern Sydney. Anna saying good afternoon. Pat, Monique, Diane. Welcome, everyone. That's really fantastic to have you on the line. And if you can just type in yes, if you can hear, and obviously you can hear me, but making sure that you can see the slide that is up. Catherine, here for session 6. Good on you, Catherine. You should get a gold star for that. Audio is great so far. Good on you, Steve. It hasn't been like that for all of the sessions, but it's here and we're ready to go. So let me introduce my great friend, and I'd like to call him a mentor, Steve Wells. I met Steve Wells and Dr. David Lake, who we had on yesterday's presentation around radical acceptance. Oh, it's been almost 12 years now, I think, Steve. I know my daughter was just born. She turns 13 in a few weeks. And I learned the wonderful tapping technique that David and Steve have really innovated and have, brought about with simple energy techniques. And I've learned a lot of great things around provocative therapy and provocative communication. Hey, Sue from the UK. I think this is one of your good friends, Steve.
Yep.
And we've got Betty, Monica, Danielle, lots of people on the line now. And Robbie saying that no driving, no emergency work. So glad to hear you so clearly, Rocky. All's good. Thank you, Robbie. We've had some people actually participating in the webinar, Steve, as passengers, not driving, so that's really fantastic. So I just wanted to say to you folks, it's an absolute honor and joy to have Steve on the line, as with David Lake, two dear friends of mine, great teachers and mentors. I say to people every time I run the Accidental Counsellor training, I learned all my good stuff from David Lake and Steve Wells. Anne is saying tapping is awesome. Well, you're here with the legends of tapping. Well, Steve's the legend of tapping, Anne. And I just want to say thank you, Steve, for giving up your time and presenting on the Accidental Counsellor Conference. Welcome. And if you can, for those who don't know you, Steve, if you can maybe just say a little bit about yourself, just a quick little history, and away you go.
Thanks, Rocky. It's a great pleasure to be with you, mate. And I suppose we should have checked that they could actually hear me. So if you can just double check that people are saying yes, that they can hear me, then that's all good. Then we're actually going ahead, because all I can see is actually the screen with the slides on it from here.
We'll do, Steve. So I'm seeing the chat box. So great, Betty saying yes, Prue saying yes. So we're all good, Steve. They can hear you. They can hear me. All the yeses are coming through. Loud and clear as a bell. Well, that's a relief, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to talk about anxiety today, and I tell people I trained in psychology, but I assure you I have fully recovered, and because that's where I started with, in my learning. I did study psychology, and I didn't realize at the time that the anxiety that I had wasn't the same anxiety that everybody else had. And, I've progressively learned over the years that my anxiety, not everybody feels the same level of anxiety. And, I've been very pleased to be able to find some things that have worked for my anxiety. Not all of which were in the traditional world of psychology. And I'm going to share the things that I found within that area, and also the things that I found outside of traditional psychology that people can use to manage their anxiety, and the stuff that works for me. And, you know, I tell people there's only a couple of things I've learned in all my study of psychology and personal development and so on that actually work at home. And I'm going to share one of those at least today.
Great, Steve. And Mark is saying, any chance of a brief rundown of tapping for those of us who aren't familiar with it? And I'm sure that's going to come in the presentation. Would that be right, Steve?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah. Well, that's the one. That's the one technique that I have learned for anxiety that works most consistently for most people, in my experience. And, you know, as you know, I've done research on it, and we've had excellent results. And there's a lot of research on tapping now. And so I'm going to share a bit about that. It's going to be one of the main techniques we're going to talk about today.
That's great, Steve. Yeah, it's of course, that's where I initially, when I found out about the tapping, I just want to tell everyone I was very, very skeptical about it all. I thought, how could this technique really work? And I was seeing a client who had a phobia of birds, Steve. I'm not sure if I've ever told you this. And she was a lawyer and had to go through to get to the court. She needed to go through a certain section where there was pigeons and everything flying, and it was really causing her a lot of problems. And everything I knew, including my studies of hypnosis and everything else, nothing was working. And so I started doing some research and came across this very strange tapping technique. And so in it, I was looking at it, and then I discovered, Steve's website, EFTdownunder.com. I've got that right, haven't I, Steve?
Yep.
Yeah, and so and then I realised, okay, so Steve and David are running a workshop in Sydney, and that was almost 13 years ago. And so there I went, I met Steve and David, and that's completely revolutionised the work that I do with my clients, my own personal life. I'm really looking forward to this session. And Steve, we've got another Steve online saying, is tapping better than the fidget spinner student survey needed?
Don't even talk to me about fidget spinners. Oh, my gosh. Okay. Yes. Short answer, yes. 100% yes.
Right. That's great. Thanks, Steve. So, we're really looking forward to what you've got to share with us today.
Okay, mate. Well, let's get into it, shall we?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so look, I just want to start out with a couple of cautions. One is today I'm going to be talking about the common anxiety that most people experience. So the worrying, particularly performance and test anxiety, is things that come up in schools. It's something that I suffered from when I was at school. You know, I had massive test anxiety and anxiety over making decisions. That kind of I'll call it regular anxiety. And even though the stuff that we're going to cover today will probably help people who have more severe and more complex anxiety, there is such a thing as anxiety disorders. And if you're suffering severe anxiety on a regular basis, then you really should work with a skilled therapist and mental health professional for the best results with those kind of conditions. You know, make sure you find someone who can help you. We're just going to skip through very quickly a couple of definitions and, just make sure we're all on the same page about this. And then I'm going to get into as much of techniques and strategies that you can use for anxiety, whether it's for yourself or for helping others. Usually it's both, because just about the whole world is suffering anxiety. And, the anxiety-based conditions are the biggest problems that we have. And I think you'd agree, fear is the biggest challenge in the world right now. Fear is actually what causes a lot of the other problems in the world. So anxiety it's really an uncomfortable feeling mostly. And so it has unpleasant bodily sensations and feelings. And it also is linked usually to worry about the future. That's a key feature of anxiety. As opposed to fear, fear is actually, like real fear, is an actual threat is present, and you respond to that threat with an increase of energy, power, adrenaline, etc., which gets you ready to deal with the threat through fighting it or flying, as in running away. And with anxiety, your body reacts as if there's a threat there, even though there's not necessarily any threat actually present. And this is the problem with anxiety, is that it can come up in all kinds of situations which it shouldn't really be connected to. And there's lots of reasons why that can happen. So your primitive alarm system gets activated, your fight-flight reflex gets activated, but there isn't necessarily a real threat there or a real reason for it, seemingly. And, you know, the body feelings and reactions we have that can range from, you know, low-level butterflies, tightness and tension in the stomach or chest or throat or whatever, through to really severe stuff like dizziness, nausea, full-blown panic, you know, that kind of thing. I remember when I was about 18 and I woke up, I had a virus, and I woke up, I couldn't breathe. I started screaming out. I thought I was dying. My dad ended up rushing me to hospital, you know, running several red lights to get me to hospital. I'm actually shaking and sweating. And of course, we ended up in the emergency department. They left me lying on a bed for 3 hours before someone came along and said, it was just a panic attack. Next time, stick a paper bag over your mouth, which was very humiliating at the time, but also very reassuring. And that was my first introduction to how severe anxiety can be. It can feel like you're actually going to die. Now, you know, in that situation, sorry, mate.
Oh, no, Steve, I was just going to say there are so many people that have the same thing. They just think they're having a heart attack, or it's just such a strong physiological reaction that you think it's a physical illness until they get a medical diagnosis where they say, you better go and see a counsellor or a psychologist because physiologically we're not seeing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, anxiety can also come from having those, like, you can get anxiety spontaneously because your mind decides that these symptoms in your body are anxiety. You know, I had another time when I woke up with what turned out to be severe back pain. I was in massive anxiety, and then I suddenly realized that it was just back pain. And, you know, the funny thing, mate, was when I realized it was back pain, the anxiety just went completely away. And I realized that it was like my mind had decided that those feelings were because I was anxious or that there was a real threat, when in actual fact, it was just because of the back pain. So anyway, typically though, what causes anxiety is that we've had negative experiences in the past with something, and we learn to associate a threat to those situations. So to give you a common example, you go to school, you have to read in front of the class, you make a mistake, everybody laughs at you. Now, humiliation or the possibility of rejection in public situations is actually, believe it or not, it actually is a real threat because we are hardwired in our nervous systems to not want to be rejected. In fact, they say the rejection is experienced in the same area of the brain as physical pain. And that must be evolutionary because we've evolved to get together in groups and to not, you know, it's better for us to survive in groups. So being ostracized from the group is a really bad thing. And so evolutionarily, it's been set up to be experienced in the same area as actual physical pain. In fact, it's even worse than that because people can remember rejection more than they can even remember severe physical pain. So we learn to link a threat to those situations, and then anything like that in future that comes up, our mind kind of goes, oh, I've been here before and this bad thing happened. If you go there, you're going to suffer. So I better give you an injection of some of that feeling to stop you from going forward. So we can also create anxiety by projecting into the future something bad happening and experiencing that as if it's actually happening. And so we get the bad feelings as if it's actually happening. And the problem with that is that most of anxiety, probably all of it actually, is actually, I call it BS, it's belief systems. It's based on false beliefs about things because we're imagining things that may never happen and usually never do happen. And I have this fantastic quote from Mark Twain on the screen. I know some people won't be able to catch up with the slides, so I am going to read it. You know, he said, I'm an old man, I've known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened. And this is the thing about anxiety, is that it doesn't usually happen. And even if something does happen, it's never the way you imagined it anyway, because the imagination is made up. And so we're scaring ourselves with made up stuff. Okay, so there is bad stuff in the world. And this is the problem that we have right now, is that all this stuff is coming to us And we are seeing stuff that we never used to see before directly, unless it was happening to us. We're seeing it in widescreen digital with surround sound as if we are there. And so that's also a problem, because we have mirror neurons in our nervous system that resonate when someone is going through an experience as if it's happening to us. So we can feel some of the feelings that people are having when they're suffering in situations like this. The other thing is that there's a tendency for people who have anxiety to put themselves into the situation and suffer as if it's actually happening to them. So it's like 2 times worse. What then happens is that we have massive worldwide projections of things going to happen. And here's an example. You know, this guy has certainly become a massive projection for the entire world. And since he got in the US, people have been imagining this. And the thing is, it isn't happening. It hasn't happened. I'm not saying it won't happen. The challenge is, if you have to go and experience it in your mind as if it's happening before it happens, then you don't get to live and enjoy your life in that time. All you do is suffer anxiety. And so we have to ask ourselves sometimes, is this really real? And like Mark Twain said, it usually isn't. It's just made up. You know, here's my son at the disaster thing at, what was that? One of those studios, you know, where you go through the disaster galley over in the US.
Right.
See, the problem is that your brain and your nervous system can't really tell the difference between something you vividly imagine and something you actually experience. So if you create an image of you suffering in the future, you imagine that vividly, and you step into the image as if it's actually happening to you, your nervous system will experience it as if it's actually happening.
That's so profound, Steve. So profound.
Look, do you remember Cyclone Yazi, that big cyclone that hit up in Queensland?
Yes.
And I remember that. And of course, what the media like to do, they like to go into the situation, and hang on to light posts and be blown away and all that kind of stuff. And they also go into the town and they interview people.
Yes.
And they went into one of these towns where the cyclone was possibly going to hit, and they're interviewing people. And they go to this woman, and they're interviewing her. Like, how do you feel about the fact the cyclone could come and hit your town? And she's absolutely distraught. And I could see her just looking off into the distance and just really terrified of what she was imagining. And she created an image in her mind, and then she described the image. She said, I can just see everything I own just being blown away.
Yes.
And I turned to my wife and I said, she's having the cyclone a day early.
Oh, yeah. And I just can't begin to tell you how profound that quote is, Steve, and that everything you were just saying, because it's so true. We think we can tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined, but our brain and our nervous system, as that quote says, can't. And so we experience it as is. And what a great comment. She's experiencing it a day early and it hasn't even happened.
Well, here's the thing, mate. Like, that cyclone never went very close at all to her town, so she didn't actually get to experience that. It never happened. But tell that to her nervous system, because if you open up her nervous system, you'll see that all these negative stress chemicals have gone through her system as if it happened, even though it didn't, and her immune system is depleted as a result, and all that kind of negative stuff. Now, here's the thing. It is helpful to be able to imagine worst case scenarios to work out how you deal with that. You can't ignore the fact that the cyclone might come and hit your town. The thing is, there's a difference between imagining it and seeing it over there as if, and working out, okay, if that happens, here's what we'll do, versus stepping into the picture, fusing with it as if it's really happening, as if you are there, and then experiencing it as if it's happening. And then you get the same physiological reactions. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%, Steve. Now, do you remember, folks, if I didn't mention this, Steve is all the way over in Perth. So I'm not sure if we've got any people in Perth. But mate, remember, I think it might have been last year, you were in Sydney doing a workshop and we caught up and we had some dinner, and I was telling you about how I was listening to family members who were going through surgery, and that I was having all these panic reactions as I was driving, just listening to it. And that's exactly what you were telling me. Remember, you were just saying, yeah, mate, you were just sort of, you went into the experience.
Yeah. So, one simple thing you can do is actually step out of the image and see it over there as if you're imagining it, rather rather than being in it. So see, even if you're in it. Anyway, I'm stepping ahead a little bit, but it's just, as usual, there's a lot to try and cover and not much time, and an hour is a lot quicker than you think. So anyway, so let me just move on, mate. Yes. The whole thing, and here's our good mate, Dr. David Lake. You never see him like this, but I saw him like this once, and I took a photo of him, and I've shown it all over the world. And he's he's having a bit of a downer. He didn't actually eat all that food. We just put it in front of him as if he did, and he's putting it on a little bit. But ultimately, it's about controlling your emotional state. And in that negative emotional state, you have trouble going forward. So we need some tools to be able to deal with our emotional states, to deal with, if you have a tendency to get anxious, if you have a tendency to imagine the worst as if it's actually happening, it's not going to work for me just to say logically, oh, that's going to upset you, don't do it. It's just like saying, people are always saying, don't worry because worry is useless. Well, that's actually not very useful advice, because the people who worry can't seem to stop themselves worrying. And paradoxically, if you try not to worry, you end up worrying more, because what you resist persists.
So I've got to share this with you, Steve. Clementine has just put in a quote that she's said she's lived by for a long time. Worry never robs today of its sorrow, but only saps tomorrow of its strength. I really love that. That's what you're talking about, I think.
Oh, totally. But knowing that doesn't help me to get rid of my anxiety about it, if that makes sense.
Indeed.
So I agree, and then I just find myself worrying, okay? So, and when we're upset emotionally, when we're worrying, when we're anxious, when we're stressed, we don't do things well. We can't learn, we can't make good decisions, etc. And so we've actually got to find some ways to manage those emotional states. And I have a model for this. I've been studying this for a long time, and I think there's 4 main things that cause our emotional states, like anxiety, and they're the 4 main areas that you can intervene to change it. Number 1 is what you're thinking and how you're thinking in your mind, if you like. Then there's how you're using your body and also the condition of your body. Then there's what behaviors you do and the skills that you've learned. And then there's this new energy system stuff, which is the energy psychology stuff, which is where tapping comes in, where your body energy can be blocked or it can be flowing. And when you have a blockage in energy flow, then you have a negative feeling that corresponds to that. And of course, when you have a model like this, you put it in a diagram and then you actually have a real model. So this is the Steve Wells model, energy and emotion model, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, let's move through it very, very quickly. Quick look at mind and mental strategies. So the mental strategies, a lot of people will know, we've been told that, we should be nicer to ourselves. We should talk nicer to ourselves. Our self-talk is very negative. Most of the things that we think about are what could go wrong. And when you're very anxious, you beat yourself up a lot. And your self-talk is negative. You focus on negative possibilities. You imagine negative possibilities and so on. So changing those things can make a major difference. And this is what I did for the first years of my psychology study, was learn different ways of getting people to change the way they talk to themselves in their head. And it does work to say, okay, and that's, I'm not talking about positive thinking, but it's a very big difference between, like, one guy says to me, he's talking about his business, he says, this is going to kill us. I said, well, that sucks, because if it kills you, you'll be dead. He says, well, all right, not literally kill us. I said, well, yeah, all right, maybe not, but thinking about it that way, how empowering is that going to be to working out solutions, as opposed to saying, this is going to be difficult, but we'll find a way through it, or we'll cope, or, we can manage this, we'll find a way, etc. So this is stuff you can do deliberately, changing your self-talk. Same thing with focus. Let me just show you this. Actually, I worked with a guy who was a golfer, and he used to go down to a particular golf course, and every single time he went on this course, on one of the holes there was a water trap just in front of the green, and he would put 2, 3, 4 balls into the water every time. And that funny thing is, he's not trying to do that, but he can't get the water out of his mind. So this is the thing that I said, the problem with The problem with trying not to be negative is that you end up thinking negatively more. So when we go back a second, I said, hang on a minute, I was talking about, okay, let's focus on, we can cope, we'll find a way through that. That is actually positive self-talk. That's good for you. But what doesn't work is trying not to be negative. The more you try not to be negative, the more you end up being negative more. And, there's a guy who discovered this when he got people to imagine, he said, try not to think of a white bear. And then, he did this with his students, and they all came back and they'd spent the whole week thinking about white bears because they've been trying not to think about it. So trying to push a thought away makes it more likely that it's going to come into your consciousness. And paradoxically, permission to think that thought reduces the likelihood of thinking it. So it does work to deliberately direct your thinking in the positive, but it doesn't work to try not to be negative and to push your negative thoughts away. So those negative thoughts, when they come, instead of having to believe them or act on them, just observe them and accept them and let them be there. And paradoxically, doing that decreases the stress activity in your brain and causes less anxiety. So let me just go back here to this guy with the anxiety that was causing his problem on the golf course, because he got anxious every time he went to that hole, and he's trying not to think of the water and ended up hitting it in there every time. So I said, instead of trying to ignore the water, instead of trying to ignore the negative, focus on it. Look at the water for a couple of good minutes and just look directly at it and say, there's the water, I know how to hit the ball there. And then after you've done that for 2 minutes, turn around and focus on where you want to hit the ball. And he knocked 14 strokes off his best score on that particular course. He knocked 9 strokes off his handicap. He was only a weekend hacker, but he was wrapped. And so there's a twin focus here. There's actually directing your focus towards what you want, and there's also not trying to oppose or push away negative thoughts. And in fact, there's a guy named Tim Ferriss, and he has a process called fear setting, where he says it's really empowering to look at the worst case scenario and work out how you'll deal with that. And that's the thing about the negative, is that it comes in and it scares us, and so we try and push it away, and then it keeps coming in because we're trying to resist it. Whereas if you just focus on the potential negative worst case scenario and go, okay, if this happened, how will I deal with it? Then it empowers you to move forward. Okay, so let's quickly move on. The thing about thinking is it's not the thought that's the problem. It's the attachment to the thought that causes the suffering.
Now, Steve, you just need to stop there. Folks, I learned this from Steve years ago, and it's a complete game changer, because most people think it's the thoughts, but it's the emotional attachment to the thoughts. I'm not going to talk anymore because we've got the expert online, but I just wanted to say to you, this is very profound. Thanks, Steve.
Well, this is something I learned from Byron Katie, who has a brilliant book called Loving What Is. And,
Great
do yourself a favor, go out and get it. And she has a profound process for questioning your thoughts. Her process is basically looking at things and saying, is this true? You're imagining the cyclone happening. Is it true? Well, actually, no, I'm standing here and I'm safe and I'm fine. Now, I can work out that it's coming. Yes, it's true that it's heading things on the radar, and I know I need to prepare, but it's not true right now, so I don't have to actually suffer right now. All I have to do is to do the preparation. The other thing about it, have a negative feeling, because the negative thought comes with it, you think the thought is causing it. But what we've discovered, particularly with tapping, is that you can imagine a negative thought or situation, and then you have the negative feeling that comes with it. You do the process like tapping, and the feeling goes away, but the thought can still be there. So it's possible to have the thought without the feeling. So it's not the thoughts that's the problem. It's actually the attachment to the thought that causes the suffering and the negative feeling. Okay, so this is what we want to do, is to work out some ways to release that emotional attachment. And, the thought-based ways, like, changing your self-talk and, imagining things working out the way you want and all that kind of stuff, that's all good. The problem with it is, mate, that you have to think about it. Someone smashes into the back of your car, you don't go, what a great opportunity, I'm going to get in the gap between stimulus and response, and, I'm going to treat this as a positive. What you do is you react, and now you've got to deal with the reaction, see? So it does work and it can work, but in my experience, it's not as powerful as some of the body-based strategies, the physiological strategies, things like changing your breathing, things like managing your body posture and how you move, learning to physically relax your body, and basically, you know, moving your body, exercising, and eating stuff that's good for you. These are all body physiology strategies. And I just want to refer to a couple of them in particular. The biggest thing that happens when you get in a stress situation where anxiety comes up is that your breathing alters. That sometimes happens without you even being aware of it. You hold your breath, or you start shallow breathing. You either don't breathe enough or you overbreathe. And therefore, that disruption in breathing is a big part of the anxiety. So stopping and taking time to breathe is a very, very powerful way of getting the anxiety to shift. And what I've found is that teaching people to breathe deeply using diaphragmatic breathing, as in breathing deeply into your diaphragm, down into the bottom of your lungs. In fact, the best way is to actually imagine that you're inflating a balloon in your stomach, and therefore when you breathe in, your stomach actually expands. You know, for ladies, it's not a good look, but it's good for you. And, you know, I always say that because a lot of ladies are concerned about expanding their stomach. But, hey, do it secretly. Do it, you know, behind the desk, whatever. Just do it. And take the opportunity to take a few good deep breaths, and that leads to better digestion, improved posture, feeling more relaxed, clearer thoughts, and basically your brain goes, hey, this is good, I'm getting the right amount of oxygen, I can think. And so, yeah, if we had time, I'd go through and do a bit of teaching on this. I just want to refer to it. Take the opportunity right now. A good thing to do is to put your hands on your tummy and then just clear your lungs out and draw your tummy in, which is using your diaphragm to breathe out, and then breathe in and allow your tummy to expand, so that your hands are actually being moved by your tummy actually expanding as your diaphragm draws down. And that actually is what a really good deep breath is. I'll just say something else here though. It's really good to count slowly as you do this, and once you breathe in, just count for another 2 or 3 or 4 while you're holding your breath a little bit before you breathe out. Otherwise, you might end up over breathing, and then you get a bit lightheaded and so on. So you really want to slow the process down. You want to do a nice deep breath. But if you just go and take, you know, 3 or 4 massive deep breaths, your brain's going to go, oh my gosh, too much oxygen, you know. then you get lightheaded, and it doesn't really help. So slow the process down. You know, I like to do 4-2-4 breathing, where you count 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, and then hold that, you know, while you've got the breath in, hold it and count 1001, 1002, and then breathe out for a slow count of 4, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. Okay, so apart from breathing, another big one in the area of our body is posture.
This is so big, Steve.
What's that?
This is so big. I teach this in some of my student workshops. Oh, there we go. Yes, they're so powerful.
There's me and my darling wife in our office, and these are what's called higher power poses. Now, this comes from the research by a lady named Amy Cuddy and her colleagues, and there's an incredible TED talk that Amy Cuddy has done, C-U-D-D-Y, and they basically had people in high power poses such as these for 2 minutes versus low power poses where you control. And this is sound, mate. When you're in contraction and you have contracted postures, then you have contracted feelings. When you're in expansion and you have expanded postures, then you have more expansive feelings. And your thoughts follow those feelings and body postures. So this is one thing that Cuddy and her colleagues found, and they also measured changes in cortisol and changes in testosterone. Now, I will say they have been replicated, and other people haven't found the exact same changes in terms of the chemical changes, which were massive in their study. But what the other studies have found is that people do feel more powerful when they do the high power poses, which is, to me, is a good reason for doing them, because what's the big problem with anxiety? It's how it makes you feel. Now, so in the research, they found even just a couple of minutes in a high power pose versus a low power pose led to a decrease in cortisol for people in the high power pose, or an increase in cortisol, which is a stress chemical, for people in low power pose. And with testosterone, it was almost the exact opposite. A 20% or so increase in testosterone, as in your confidence and power, from standing or sitting in a high power posture, versus a decrease of 15% or so in testosterone from sitting or standing in low power posture. There's a massive amount of other research which also corroborates this kind of stuff, where, for example, having people sit up straight with their shoulders back and head high versus in slump postures just for 3 minutes, and then they give them difficult challenges to do, and the people who are sitting up persevere almost twice as long as the slouches. Now, here's something for your schools as well. The same result happens for people with computer monitors above versus below their eye line. Now, what are kids doing all the time right now? They're looking down at tablets, they're looking down at mobile phones, they're looking down at laptops if they still have them, or iPads or whatever, and therefore they're putting themselves in down postures. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have massive increases in anxiety around the place, and also people are feeling more tired and having less energy. So, if we had time, I could go on for about an hour just on the research on posture and what it means in terms of how you feel.
Well, I'm going to get you back. So if you are sitting...
What's that?
I said, I'll get you back.
No worries, mate. Well, there's a lot of it is actually, there's a book by Wiseman called Rip It Up, and he summarizes a lot of that research. And it's very, it's kind of a self-help book, but it summarizes a lot of research on this kind of stuff. So it's worth looking up to. I think it's Richard Wiseman. The book is called Rip It Up. Anyway, very easy self-help read with lots of practical information. Anyway, the big thing that we want to talk about today is this new stuff. And, I talk about the 3 areas. There's the mind-based stuff, how you think and what you think. There's the body-based stuff, which we just looked at. The other stuff was, behavior and skills. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I am going to talk about this 4th area, which is the energy, which is now the basis of what's been called energy psychology. And the theories behind energy psychology is that you have, your body has an energy system. Your energy can be up or down or high or low, and it's flowing or it's stagnant or it's, blocked. And that changes how you feel. And in particular, in energy psychology, the most commonly known technique is a technique called tapping, otherwise known as acupoint stimulation or meridian stimulation or meridian tapping. It's basically tapping on acupressure points on the body, because one of these presumed energy systems flows through these points, which is the basis of acupressure and acupuncture. And like you, mate, when I first learned about this, I thought, okay, that's some weird wacko technique. And it turns out it's not. It turns out it's actually, and now there's been a massive amount of research. In fact, when I first learned about tapping, I wanted to test it out. And so I did some research myself. My research was one of the randomized controls trials which Feinstein reviewed back in 2012, when he was able to say that, these techniques have now met the American Psychological Association's evidence-based criteria for a number of conditions, including phobias, test anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, public speaking anxiety, and much more than that since 2012. And, in our study, we've got a bunch of people with phobias of cockroaches and spiders and mice and rats and small animals, basically. And we gave them a single 30-minute treatment with this technique of stimulating acupressure points on their own body by tapping on them with their fingers. And usually you tap on, using the fingers of your dominant hand, the index finger and middle finger, like this lady in the picture here is doing. And, these points are all the same points that are used in acupressure and acupuncture. So this was a big review that Feinstein did of 51 peer-reviewed papers that had been done up until that time. Well, since then, there's actually been enough research to do these big things called meta-analyses, where they combine all the research, that meet sufficient criteria, and then do kind of study of all the studies and work out how big the effects of the results are for all those studies. And there's actually been 4 meta-analyses. I've got 3 of them on here. Klon did a study of all the research on acupoint tapping for anxiety, and he found a D, or an effect size of 1.23. Now, an effect size of 0.8 is considered large. So an effect size of 1.23, or above 1, is considered a large or very large effect. And in these meta-analyses, they looked at anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is all using this strange tapping technique. Now, the most common of the tapping techniques is called EFT, emotional freedom techniques. The original version was called TFT, thought field therapy, and the version that Dr. David Lake and I developed, we call SET, simple energy techniques. And those 3 that I've mentioned all tend to use some or all of the points that I'm showing you in the diagram here. So there's a point on the top of the head, a point at the start of the eyebrow, side of the eye, under the nose, under the chin or under the lip, just under the head of the collarbone, under the arm, about level, middle of the bra band for ladies, or level with the nipple on the side of the body for men. One guy said to me, I don't have a nipple on the side of my body. And I said, well, just tap around level with the one that you have. And we also use these points on the finger. So on the side of the thumb, level with the base of the thumbnail. That point is on the palm side of the thumb. Then on the side of the index finger, the side of the middle finger, these are all level with the nail. Oh, actually, here's an old diagram, mate. I don't know how I've got this. Is an old diagram because in EFT, they don't use the ring finger, but in SET, we do use the ring finger. I don't know how we ended up with an old diagram on here, but we also tap on the ring finger and the little finger. And then on the point on the bottom of the hand, if you were doing a karate chop, there's a point there. And then there's a point on the back of the hand. That one's called the gamut spot between the, just back from the last row of knuckles, between the, about a centimetre back, between the little finger and ring finger, the bones that go up to make those fingers. And those are the main points. Yeah, mate?
I was just going to interrupt you there really quickly, Steve, because you'll probably say this, but let me jump in. I'm going to type into the chat box, and I want to just say to everyone, I'm going to just type this in, start tapping, right? You've seen the diagram there. Just get your fingers and just start tapping. Steve will talk to you a little bit more about this. You can start tapping on any of the points. You don't have to do them in order. But even as, forget about how strange it looks, just do it as Steve is talking, and you'll notice what happens. I'm going to hand back over to you.
I'd like to, I know this could cause a glitch in the system where we don't want to necessarily risk this, but I might actually come on off the...
we've got people are saying that they've started to tap, Steve.
Yeah, but those are the people who know it. I'm just going to come back here to you, if that's all right. So you can see my screen and your screen and stuff like that. And I'm just going to turn my screen share off for a minute, and I'm going to actually show people some of these points, if that's all right, mate. Is that all right?
Yes,
of course. On the video?
Yeah.
Okay, fingers crossed, see if it works. All right, so now I'm going to turn my webcam on. That's me there, right? Okay, so here I am, right? Okay.
Hey, Steve.
Now, can I make me like on the full screen, or can you see me on the full screen already?
I can't see you on the full screen, Steve. Actually, hang on a sec. Yes, here we go. I can see you on.
All right. So look, this is what you do. So the top of the head point, I don't tend to use this one when I'm first showing people tapping, because it feels like people should be rubbing their tummy as well. And it's, anyway, it's hard enough for people to accept that doing tapping is going to help you with anxiety. But I can tell you that tapping has helped me more than any other technique that I learned in all my study of psychology and all my, seeking and searching over thousands of years. This is one of my bookcases, or 3 I have in here, and, 2 more I have at home, and, hundreds of books that I had to get rid of because I didn't have enough bookcases. And, so I've been searching for what to do, and tapping is something that's helped me, it's helped my wife, it's helped our kids with their, fears and anxieties and stresses, and it's just fantastic.
It's helped me, Steve. Yeah. It's helped me. It's helped my clients.
Yeah. So I just want to show people what to do. So if you just take 2 fingers of your dominant hand and you go in between your eyebrows, and then just go towards one side and just tap gently there at the start of the eyebrow. Now, you could tap on this side, or you could tap on the other side, or some people like to do it on both sides. It's not necessary, it doesn't really make any difference which one. And it isn't necessary to tap on one side and then the other side unless unless you are a little bit obsessive compulsive. And if you're a little bit obsessive compulsive, then you really can benefit from learning this technique and also going and getting some help for your condition. The next point is on the side of the eye, edge of the temple, and just the end of the eyebrow, and you just tap in here, hard enough to feel it but not hard enough to hurt, and then under your eye in the top of your cheek. And when you're tapping, you can tap 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, or 20 times. If you want to, you can tap 10 times on every point. It doesn't really matter. And then under the nose, in the hollow, in the midline, and then under the lip, in the hollow, in the midline. And the next point is under the head of the collarbone. So if you just go to this U in the base of your throat, and then there's a knobby bone on either side there, and then just go underneath that knobby bone, that's the head of the collarbone. And as I mentioned, under the arm, it's about level with the nipple on the side of the body for gents and middle of the bra band for women. Just tap in there at 90 degrees. And then on the hand, if I can get this in front of the camera correctly, we're just tapping on the side of the thumb, level with the base of the thumbnail. And then the side of the index finger, this is on the thumb side of the index finger, level with the nail. And then on the side of the middle finger, and then on the side of the ring finger, and then on the side of the little finger, and then on the bottom of the hand like this. Now we also, that point on the back of the hand, we don't worry about that so much because it's already covered when you're doing this process. There is a point on the wrist, about 2.5 finger widths from the main crease. You can just tap on that with the flat of your hand like this, and on the outside like this. And so how do you do this? Well, number one, you can do this when you're feeling anxious and calm yourself down. The only problem with only doing it that way is, number one, if you get anxious out in public, you're not going to walk around tapping on the points like this. But you can just gently touch or rub the points, and people naturally rub these points when they're feeling stressed. The good news also, though, is you can do it before you go into the situation. And if you do a good job, then you will either have less anxiety or no anxiety when you go in that situation later. And if you do a good job with learning how to use the tapping, you can treat the things that used to make you feel anxious, and they no longer make you feel anxious. So as an example, our good friend, Dr. David Lake, who was on yesterday, Rocky, and as you know, he had a severe public speaking phobia. And when we learned EFT, emotional freedom techniques, he went up with Gary Craig on stage over in San Francisco, California, and in front of 75 people from all over the world, he was doing this tapping on all the things about speaking that upset him and his memories of the situations when he was a child. And after that treatment, he was able to get up and be in front of the group and not feel anxious. And I invited him to come to a workshop that I was running over in Melbourne, and he stood up and introduced himself, and he turned around to me, he said, "I can't believe it, I don't feel any of it." The tapping had actually resolved the issue of disturbance in his body so that there was no longer any bad feelings connected to public speaking. And that's a massive result. That's a very different result to, forcing yourself to do it, but you still feel anxious every time, Exposure therapy is an effective treatment, but it's really hard to do. And you still end up feeling a bit anxious, even if you've done it 100 times, or most people do. That was my experience in the past anyway. Let me just show you one more thing with this. The people who know tapping already know this. You can also tap using the thumb of the same hand by just letting the thumb tap on the side of the index finger. Just let the thumb be the tapper, and then let the thumb tap on the side of the middle finger, and then the side of the ring finger, and then the side of the little finger. So the good thing about this kind of tapping, and if you want to be clever, you can tap on the side of the thumb with the index finger or the middle finger, and you can just tap continually on those points up and down. And you can do this in public. See, I could actually be tapping on those points, and I am right now while I'm talking to you, and you wouldn't know it. I could be sitting in a meeting, and underneath the table, I could be tapping on these points. And what I'm doing is I'm actually calming my mind and body at the same time. The tapping releases endorphins, that's been shown. It reduces cortisol, which is stress chemicals in your brain, that's been demonstrated. It's also been shown to change your brainwave patterns towards more delta waves, which interrupts the anxiety messages. And so it's a great process to do. And this is a very subtle process, but it can accumulate a benefit. Of course, you can tap on these points too, but it's a bit harder to do this kind of thing out in public if a public situation is where your anxiety comes up. So this is why it's better to do it at home, imagining the situation and then doing the tapping. And then usually, because when you imagine it, you can feel some of the feelings. When you do the tapping, when you're imagining it, then the feelings start to shift. And if you can imagine it and you no longer feel anxious, there's a very good chance that when you go in the situation, that you're not going to feel the same level of anxiety.
It's so wonderful, Steve. And we've had people, I've been responding to lots of questions and people on the chat, and people are asking about, where we can get some resources from you, Steve. So I've pointed them to www.eftdownunder.com, and I'm sure you'll let them know towards the end of the session, Steve, what else or where else they could go. And Monique has a question here, Steve, that I thought I'd let you answer. How often before you notice a difference in your phobia? It really depends, but I'm going to let Steve answer this, Monique.
Okay, well, the answer is it depends. And but when you start doing the tapping, most people will notice that they feel things starting to move and shift within the first 5 minutes. The problem is that some phobias are more complex and some are less complex. So some people can actually get over a phobia in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. When we did our research, we gave people a single 30-minute treatment, and every one of them got better, and some of them got over their phobias. We had a lady who wouldn't even go in her house if there was a mouse in her house. She slept in her car, and after a 30-minute treatment, she was able to go up and touch the mouse, and no anxiety whatsoever. Her granddaughter got a pet rat. She was able to have the pet rat on her without it. It was like, they're really cute, and that's a real result, But not everybody gets a result in half an hour, and some problems are more complex. But you should notice some things starting to shift, and the problem is there are different parts to the anxiety problem. And so if you're starting to notice a few shifts in how you're feeling when you're doing it, then the chances are that you're getting results on that thing. So I just try and think of every different way that this can upset you, every different memory you have that might be connected to this, every different feeling you have in your body that this causes you, etc. And sometimes you can't do that all yourself. It's better to find a practitioner. We have practitioners on our website at eftdownunder.com. Rocky can, Rocky does this. He can put you onto people locally in Sydney as well. Dr. David Lake just happens to be over in Sydney for those of you who are there. And we've got people all over the world.
Yes.
Let me just come back to sharing my screen, mate, because I need to, I want to make sure that I...
And Steve, just one more quick question. Jody is saying here, has it ever, never worked by reporting back to you that it just did not work?
Yes, nothing works for everybody, but my results for people with anxiety-based conditions have been better than with any other techniques that I learned by thousands of times. So if you have there's a number of ways it doesn't work. Mostly the people that I didn't get results with in the early days, I now would know how to get results with them now. It's better, it works better if you do it with someone who's trained, who also has experience in working with your particular problem and your condition. So there's lots of people who do tapping now, but not all of them are experienced in using it with some more severe conditions and so on. And there's a lot of variations around. So you want to be a little bit careful. You want to make sure that you're working with someone who's trained. Most people are saying it's great for self-help, but you can't do everything with self-help. So, I've done tapping myself and got relief on a whole bunch of things. And then some things I couldn't get a result myself. And then when I did it with somebody else, then I was able to get a result. So, it's not going to rewrite the book on every condition. My results with people with, for example, with severe obsessive compulsive disorder have been lukewarm. Although Dr. David Lake got a result with a person who was very severe OCD, and she used to have to check for 2 hours before she could leave the house, and he just had her do that finger tapping while she was checking, as she was going through her checking process in the house. And over 5 sessions with him, she went down from 2 hours to 10 minutes. She got off medication. She used to get hospitalized with her severe anxiety. She never ended up back in a hospital. She ended up having a baby. The baby had sleep apnea, which would make most parents have a panic attack, and she just tapped the whole time, and so she was able to deal with that. But I have to say, for me, when I've worked with people with those very, very severe conditions like OCD, the results have only been moderate in my experience. So, you know, there's a number of reasons why it may or may not work, and mostly it's to do with persistence, and also you can't do it all yourself.
Yes. Now, Steve, I just want to let you know, because we've got about, we've gone 55 minutes, because Steve can't see the time and he wanted me to give him a signal. A couple of things here, Steve, that I've responded to folks, and people are saying, first of all, a couple of points. You don't have to tap in any order. How long do you do the tapping? Well, 5 or 10 minutes, but as you and David teach, do as much as you can. The more, the better. Is really important, I think, also. And then also, Betty said, do you tap while thinking of the phobia? That's exactly right, Betty. But also, as in the SET approach that Steve and David have innovated and put together, I do a lot of tapping when I go for a walk. So not just when you're in the negative state. So just really quickly responded to those, Steve. Did you want to add anything quickly to any of those points?
Well, look, yeah, a couple of those things are on this kind of a summary up on the screen right now. You can tap any order, either side of the body, as long as you're tapping on several of the points. Even if you don't remember all of them, if you remember 4 or 5 or 6 of them, then you can usually get a result. You can focus on whatever you're aware of, whether it's thoughts or feelings or the body sensations. You can tap directly in a way where you focus on all the different parts of the thing that upset you. On a search and destroy mission kind of thing. And you can also just tap on the points. And we call this energy toning. If you tap on a daily basis, your general anxiety comes down and your good confidence and optimism increases. So that can happen over time. And in fact, we've found a lot of people, if they do enough tapping, a lot of the things that used to upset them and make them feel anxious just don't bother them anymore. And that's because they've actually done, this is a form of emotional fitness. It's the same as exercise. Exercise actually works. The only problem with exercise, you've got to do so damn much of it, and you've got to do it consistently. And when you do that consistently, it actually has a beneficial effect in reducing your overall anxiety and negative arousal, and helping you to cope better. Well, tapping does that, but it actually tends to do it much more quickly. And so if you start tapping every day, and you tap for, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, like you say, Rocky, if you go for a walk, you can just tap on the points, even if you're not feeling anxious. And what you're doing is you're kind of stimulating your energy system and tuning and toning it. And you're also doing all those good things where the tapping itself is releasing endorphins, and the cortisol is actually, being reduced, and the brain waves are starting to be beneficially altered. And all that leads up to feeling better and being less stressed and being less anxious. And so then when you get in situations that make you feel anxious, yes, if you are triggered, you can use you can use the tapping for first aid, but you can also, you'll also likely find that you're not feeling as stressed if you've done it every day for a couple of weeks or so.
I've got to share this with you, Steve. Natalie says this. I've got to share this with you. When my good friend Natalie's online, and she says, instead of telling our daughter, stop biting your nails, we've begun telling her, Grace, start tapping. Within 24 hours, there was a massive improvement. That's great, Nat.
Well, look, I had a good friend of mine. She actually had bitten her nails for about 45 years, and one session of tapping, she hasn't bitten her nails since. And, yes. People... by the way, tapping also interrupts the process of biting your nails, but it also has effects beyond that. It's not just distraction. It actually has beneficial effects physiologically. So, mate, just very quickly, the more you use the tapping, the better the results are likely to be. Use it mindfully. Just notice what's there, accept and allow what's there, and then follow it. Like I said before, you can let the negative thoughts be there and don't try and make them go away. Just add the tapping to them, and just notice where they move to from there. And let me just go here, because I'm now going to skip, because I see that we have about 1 minute left. So just for people who want to follow this up, we do have, we start out with EFT down under, because EFT is the generic term for most of the tapping techniques, but you'll find information on our website about the original EFT as well as our SET. and as well as the more advanced approaches that Rocky mentioned, like the provocative energy techniques. We've got free videos on there. You can download a special report and a free ebook at EFTdownunder.com. In particular, if I can just show you the screen here, up the top where my cursor is here, you've got EFT, SET, and PET. There'll be a drop down there, and you can go to the section on simple energy techniques, and then you can access those videos and the special report. And then in the personal development area, which you'll see the drop down on there, there's stuff on fears, phobias, anxiety, and particularly public speaking anxiety, which is a very common form of anxiety. And so, those are the starting points if you want to go and find a bit more about this. On every page, you'll see, I'm down the bottom right-hand corner here, you'll see to get a free copy of our free ebook and free newsletter, just put your name and email in there, and you'll get that. We don't just send out, buy this, buy that. We send out a lot of free stuff. I end up giving a lot of things away, and so there's always good information that's going to come out about, and especially what's happening in the world of energy psychology and so on. So having said that, I know our time is up. Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Rocky, for inviting me. Thank you who has made a lot of I hope, and I hope.
Hey, sorry, Steve, you're just sort of breaking out there, mate. I'm just towards the end there, but I just wanted to thank you. We've got so many people on the chat line, Steve, just thanking you. It's just been such an absolute honour to have some of the people who I consider as mentors present on this conference, and it's just such a great session. Folks, you really need to go to EFTdownunder.com, sign on to the newsletter, because Steve sends such great information. You'll really, really love it. Steve, so we've got Mendy, Katrina, Donna, Danielle, Clementina. This looks like a great web page. Thanks so much, Steve. Absolutely. Please go there, folks. Carmelina, Monique, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time. Absolutely, Jody.
If you can hear me, can I just mention?
Yes.
There's also a section on there if for using tapping with your own children, and also some stuff. If you want to be using this with kids, then a few guidelines for that as well.
Yeah, that's really great, Steve. And I'm sure people will find this on your website. But we're right now, and also this will be in our members area later on, but just so we can timestamp it, this is January 2018, and your next workshop in Sydney is in April. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, I'm going to be over in Sydney in April. I've got a Perth workshop in April as well, middle of April. I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but they'll be on the website under events and training, and all of the programs that we have that are coming up on there. And there's also a possibility to access programs. We do online stuff. So I actually do tapping, group coaching with people all over the world. That's why Sue, who you mentioned, she's up in the UK watching this, I believe. So, yeah.
Yes, and Kathy saying, keen to check this out further for other things like PTSD. Works amazing for that, Kathy. And so many people saying, thank you, Steve. I just wanted to pass that over to you. Big hugs, big love, mate. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I know you've got to get off to the cricket, so we're going to sign off for now. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Bye-bye.